Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So let's talk about the Festival of the Lost lore. Yep, we're gonna cover it. But no, we're not gonna talk too much about Luna 4. No matter how much Destiny the meme on Twitter wants me to cover it. All seriousness, this is the first time that Festival of the Lost has had any substantial lore ever since the Thunderlord quest, and in this way, I think it needs to be said that this was a great effort by the team. The lore book is huge. I mean, granted, not every single entry is going to be as long as the Books of Sorrow, and I'm kind of thankful for that, but that's because there's 27 of them. Now, I'm not personally a fan of the lore in this particular one because I feel like it's a little bit unfocused and scattered with so many sources that it's referencing, but in all fairness, I think that's honestly kind of the point. This is realistically an investigation that's being conducted by Glint into the nature of the Headless Ones and their origins, and in that sense it's a little bit of a literal wild goose chase, except the wild geese in this instance are big hive knights with pumpkins for heads. And of course that only gets stranger, and is commented to be as strange as it sounds, later down the line. The reports being really scattered means that we're going to format this lore video and this book a little bit differently. I've asked Martin, our editor, to go ahead and put the great board of things we know about the Headless Ones up. That's going to look a little bit like a whiteboard or a corkboard or something. And every single time we learn something about a Headless One, we're going to go ahead and jot it down. And then, I don't know, we can connect it with red string afterwards, or we can just, I don't know, group them together. I'm not sure. I'm not the one editing this. Martin's your guy for that. Having said that, he's got every single right to edit in that gif of me being the guy from Always Sunny in Philadelphia who has this corkboard. And yes, this is exactly the reason why we're doing it like this. Also because, again, there is no easy way to format all this lore. So hold on to your ghosts, everybody. We're going to begin a very long investigation. Our story starts with Glint leaving behind Crow on Keitel's ship, where he believes that Crow is going to be safe, and he then goes off and starts investigating the Headless Ones. The first source that Glint really finds is a report from a hidden agent who remains anonymous throughout the story. This hidden agent, who for the time being we'll call Alien Guy, yes, that's a reference to Ancient Aliens too, claims to have seen the Headless Ones when scouting on Europa. Alien Guy's report is found in the Europa 4 lore book, where he claims to have seen the Headless Ones, exactly where we see them in-game, in the Europa Lost sector near Cadmus Ridge. Of course, he also states that they have Hive Knight bodies, pumpkin heads, and three-eyed flaming smiles. After making this report, though, he submits himself for a full psychological workup, and the return message about this report basically tells Alien's Guy that he's being reassigned by hidden leadership after they've read this report. It also goes off the record to tell him that his report has been making its way through the tower and it's come across as a bit of a laughingstock. The guy is now basically seen as, well, Alien's Guy. He's advised to play it off as exhaustion causing an optical illusion, and whilst most people don't believe him, Glint meets with Alien Guy in a sake bar to try and discuss it. Whilst in the Drunken Noodle, that's actually the name of the sake bar, they go ahead and start discussing things, and when Glint goes ahead and calls the Headless Ones, Alien Guy basically goes off completely off the rails and says no, they did have heads, they had pumpkin heads and everything, and even ends by saying, and I quote, "I saw what I saw, damn it!" So what have we learned so far? Well, we've learned that the Headless Ones were witnessed by a hidden agent, and the majority of the tower, and most people generally, think that they're a myth, or at very least that this one agent had a bout of exhaustion and an optical illusion. Or maybe they think that Alien's Guy does indeed deserve his own program on the History Channel. Either way, that's going up on the board first. In the Europa book, Glint finds out more. Glint discovered 3 audio logs from a group of Exos that were drawn to Europa through their dreams of the Deepstone Crypt. The logs are distressing and take on a much darker tone than our earlier encounter with Alien's Guy, and it's divided into 3 parts. Really quickly, I'm going to go ahead and read them back to back because they're quite quick and it gives you a better idea of some of the details. Part 1 is this. The following audio imprint was recovered by Glint, the Ghost, during scans of an EXO production facility on Europa. Its origin remains a mystery. We all saw it. The machine tower, buried in ice. At first, we thought it was a glitch, some kind of psychological artifacting created by the transfer of our consciousness into a digital format. The bio-mind just trying to adapt to life in a machine body. Inconsistencies like that are pretty common, especially right after a reboot. What isn't common is for a whole group of us to experience the exact same vision at the same time. If it was a glitch, it must be a subroutine buried further down than any of us have diagnosed before. Something we all have in common from before the reboot. But if it's not a glitch, then what the hell is it? Part 2 continues the story with the following. The following audio imprint was recovered by Glint the Ghost during scans of an EXO production facility on Europa. Its origins remain a mystery. We finally arrived. Trading the red dust of Mars for the blue ice of Europa feels right. The visions became more intense the closer we got. Mortimus 3 thinks it's a warning from the Warmind, or an assignment, a secret mission, something that only we could achieve. Tomorrow we begin our search for the machine tower, but still there's a nagging suspicion. Is this some kind of collective glitch? Is it all just in our heads? Part 3 leads us to a grisly conclusion, presumably from inside the Cadmus Ridge Lost Sector. The following audio imprint was recovered by Glint the Ghost during scans of an EXO production facility on Europa. Its origin remains a mystery. Mortimus 3 looked so content lying on the conveyor belt, like he was getting the best sleep of his life. I envied him. Once the conveyor belt started, the Maker's spindly pneumatic arms came to life. They descended on Mortimus, darting in and out of his joints, dismantling him piece by piece. It started with his hands and feet and worked its way inward, unmaking him from a whole into a million tiny components. There was a moment after all his limbs and torso had been stripped away, and he was just a head with a long jumble of neural connectors streaming out of his neck like a robotic jellyfish, when his eyes opened. He looked at me, mouth gaping, like he was trying to tell me something, and then his eyes went dark. It's my turn next. So from what we can learn, a bunch of Exos were drawn to the Cadmus Ridge Lost Sector and discovered a mechanism in its depths that disassembled their bodies till they were just heads and a bunch of attached wiring and components. So I guess we'll write down that a bunch of Exos were decapitated and disassembled somewhere on the board. The Europa portion of the book continues to tell us about the nature of myths. On the one hand, Saint 14 basically reminds us all that not all myths are true if we hear them, and on the other hand, a Cryptarch, who we've not met before, kind of confirms this by saying that sheepdogs and lumberjacks are legendary creatures like the Minotaur and the Yeti. Do note, dear listener, that I've seen plenty of costumed idiots dressed as both lumberjacks and yetis in my time at university, and yet only one of those exists in real life. So I guess we'll put that on the board, that there are implications that such myths, such as the Headless Ones, aren't really real. Sorry, Aliens guy, the Tower Consensus generally stands against you. Of course, this also has the broader point that needs to be made, which is quite simply that, hey, you know, when it comes down to it, we don't exactly know the artifacts of a culture that we haven't experienced. After all, take a look at the Cryptarch, who thinks that Minotaurs and sheepdogs are of the same legendary or mythical ilk. It's just not the case. Not at all. All of that is the stuff from the Europa book, but it leads us on to the Luna book. The Luna book features conversations between Glint and Ikora, Eris Morn, one of the recovered Techians from this season, which I think is called Elia. I'm gonna go ahead and go with Elia as a pronunciation for that. And a Cryptarch called Cryptarch Yoreli. It also includes notes from Dr. Wade, who was present at the K1 artifact research station on the moon. So I guess we'll start there. If everybody doesn't know what K1 is, a brief explanation. You know the Anomaly Crucible map? K1 is an artifact of darkness that is stored inside there, and an entire team of Chinese aerospace and Clovis Bray scientists were effectively studying this artifact, and they all started to go completely mad and had bouts of massive insomnia. Not to mention that eventually all of them were murdered under mysterious circumstances. Dr. Wade was one of those personnel, and his logs reveal a little bit more about not only the K1 artifact, but also the potential for another Headless One incident. I'll go ahead and read all three of his logs, and leave you with some thoughts. From the private notes of Dr. Wade Bowe, K1 Dig Site 4, date unknown. Had my first bout of pre-dormital sleep paralysis last night. It was expected, given the insomnia. What I didn't expect was for it to feel so real. Now I understand why the miners are scared. The figure standing over me was a shadow, but also solid. My mind was 100% convinced it was physically present. Terrifying. Another surprise was how familiar the shadow seemed. I had the eerie feeling that I would have recognized it, if I could have just seen its face. These phenomenons of seeing shadows over you as you sit in sleep paralysis are well-known and well-documented phenomenon for the crew of the K1 site. And in fact, there's a whole ton of people who not only report shadowy hallucinations, but also see further occurrences, such as this continue on with the K1 dig site until eventually they descended into complete anarchy, and the entire dig site started getting attacked by unknown entities. Furthermore, we have more to this story. Take a listen to the second entry from Dr. Wade. From the private notes of Dr. Wade Bow, K1 dig site 4, date unknown. Nobody has slept in over 12 days, and people are becoming desperate. We're out of pentobarbital and dexmedetomidine. Instances of alcohol abuse are up dramatically. One poor woman even tried to knock herself out with diluted isopropyl alcohol. Meanwhile, my hallucinations have gotten stronger each night. The shadow is becoming clearer and clearer. For the first time, I realized why it seemed so familiar. The shadow is me, or another version of me. I also realized why I didn't recognize it sooner. It's because that version of me, from whatever time or dimension, he doesn't have a head. What does he want? Finally, this headless reflection of Dr. Wade makes its wishes clear in the last log of the entries. From the private notes of Dr. Wade Bow, K1 dig site 4, date unknown. The hallucinations have become persistent. My headless friend now appears during the daytime. I see him out of the corner of my eye, but when I turn my head he disappears. I've also started losing time. I will blink and suddenly I'm in a strange location several hours later. I'm not sure if it is short-term memory loss or a fugue state. Yesterday I woke up in front of the equipment locker, standing in front of the plasma cutters. Several were already missing. The shadow was standing right next to me. I think I know what he wants. So the headless version of Dr. Wade wanted Dr. Wade to decapitate himself, and potentially many others on the K1 artifact site, although perhaps others were experiencing a similar hallucination, as implied by the fact that some of the plasma cutters were already missing. Intriguing idea. Maybe everybody was getting the same hallucination, and it was simply one being behind it all pulling the strings. All this while the team was struggling with their regular bouts of insomnia and hallucination. Man, the K1 artifact really was bad news. Of course, it was also the source of these hallucinations, as we can tell from some of the lore on the K1 artifact, and it was probably the thing that directed the scientists and miners on the site to, well, do everything. Whether it was decapitate themselves, or whether it was all of the nonsense that followed on from that. And if you don't know about any of that, well, yeah, you should probably go ahead and look at my complete Story of the Darkness video, because there's an entire chapter of it dedicated to the K1 artifact. Again, we don't know entirely what happened there, but maybe this sheds a little bit of light on it. So that's what we'll go ahead and put down on the board next. Another group was being drawn to the idea of decapitating themselves by dark forces. And this leads us to our second potential group of headless ones. This seems to be the common thread thus far, is that all the headless ones are victims who have previously been decapitated. But that's not where Luna's story, or at least the Luna book's story, ends. Glint's investigations in the Lunar Lost sector also provide several conversations. In particular, the first conversation is one with Eris Morn, where she basically shoots down the idea of the Headless One's existence completely, saying, "I was on the moon for as long as I was, and I would have seen them, and you bet that I would have remembered." And you know what? If anyone presents a really solid wall of "no, trust me, I would have seen it," it's Eris Morn. For all we know, she survived centuries in the Hellmouth, if the old lore is to be believed still. So, realistically, yeah, maybe believe Eris on that one, but that's not going to stop Glint. Next thing that happens is that Glint talks to one of the Techians in this season. Again, it's Elia. Glint just straight up asks whether she's heard of a sinister group of pumpkin-headed monsters during her training. Elia actually responds that she might have though, and this is where things get interesting, but also it's where I need to send Moira, aka Destiny the Meme, to Horny Jail. Yeah, we're gonna talk ever so briefly about Luna 4. You see, Glint investigates the topic of the Headless Ones and pumpkins generally with a cryptarch called Cryptarch Ureli. Ureli and Glint discern that in Golden Age culture, pumpkins were popular around this time of year, and it was believed to be a means of communicating with the dead. And it was believed that at that time of year it was easier or simpler to communicate with the dead because the, well, basically walls between the world were thinner. It's a time when you could cross over more easily. Cryptarch Ureli then has a moment where, in his attempt to demonstrate how popular pumpkins were at the time, he opens up a document that was previously sealed and was published at a time for, and I quote, "Gentlemen." Yep, this is a magazine. And yes, it's the kind that I can't talk about on YouTube or this gets demonetized. Ureli then literally gets distracted by pictures of pumpkins being painted on things, and Glint takes all of this to mean that the pumpkins were probably used by Golden Age humanity to communicate with the dead. So yeah, there's that. I'm gonna call Ureli Horny Guy from now on whenever I refer to him. I think that's fair. Anyway, these findings later inform Glint in another conversation that he has with Techian Elia, where she states that the pumpkins being a symbol of the Headless Ones would make sense if they're a symbol of communication with the dead. Elia later explains how monsters in humanity's past, many monsters in fact, would have originated in the Golden Age. Monsters such as Clovis Bray would have attempted to subvert the laws of life and death. She also, at this point, mentions Nokris, though not by name. Not that that stops Glint, who mentions him directly by name, and Elia basically has to confirm right then and there that yes, they are indeed talking about the same Hive Wizard. Elia states that Nokris created many abominations with both living and dead test subjects, and that the Moon Miners from the K1 artifact were amongst their number. She states that access to the pumpkins potentially enhanced Nokris's research. So I guess let's put down on the board that we have Horny Guy. I guess. Cryptarch Ureli creates some kind of point about the pumpkins being used as a metaphor for communication with the dead, or maybe as a means of communicating with the dead according to Golden Age culture, and that's maybe the thing that everybody believes now in this day and age of Destiny, because that's their imperfect understanding of how the Golden Age worked, and what human culture was like back then. Because again, it's a post-apocalypse. They didn't know about all that. I mean, these are the people that don't think that pineapple exists. They think that it's a made-up fruit. So, yeah, interesting. We can also, of course, put down that there is the potential for the Headless Ones to be a creation of Nokris. And that's a big tangent thread that we'll go ahead and talk about later. We also hear from Ikora Rey talking about how Cayde used to see the Headless Ones and used to write things up about them in his mission reports. Glint requests to see those mission reports and she obliges him, but aside from the fact that Cayde bragged about seeing them, we learn nothing much from this particular entry. It's still going on the board that supposedly Cayde saw them, but again, I think the braggadocious nature of Cayde and the fact that he would have bragged about seeing these headless monsters, and of course, daringly and dashingly making it out alive, is probably the point of Cayde's story. It's tall tales being told by a hunter that not everybody is going to immediately take seriously. Finally, we reach the final section of the book, which is the Nessus section, which has another series of entries. In these, Glint talks to Failsafe about the Headless Ones, as well as Mithrax and Ido. He also uncovers a series of logs from the Lost Sector on Nessus that's been haunted, and it basically reveals that there was a team of 4 Guardians there that held the Lost Sector as Vex and Fallen were fighting over the Exodus Black. They were overrun and requested air support, and when air support and backup and extraction teams arrived, all the Guardian bodies there that had been discovered had been decapitated by the Fallen. The recovery teams then had to evacuate themselves before the Fallen advanced too far and overtook them. We're noting that down on the board too. That's now 3 instances of people being beheaded or decapitated, and yeah, all of them take place in these spooky places. Interesting. Not at all a link, not even slightly. We also hear from Mithrax, the Kell of the House of Light, who stated a rumor that the Headless Ones on Nessus might in fact be Twisted Hive experiments, or might be Guardians that had been turned to darkness. He also directs Glint to an Elixni engineer in the House of Light called Clyphix. Having said that, Mithrax directly calls Clyphix an idiot. So, I guess we'll call him Idiot Guy. We now have Aliens Guy, Horny Guy, and Idiot Guy. The Holy Trinity, I guess. Idiot Guy also perfectly describes seeing a Headless One, in spite of the fact that Mithrax and Ido, his daughter, doubt what he says at every turn. It's also seen that when Clyphix describes what he's seen, Ido gives the Elixir equivalent of rolling her eyes. So, no one believes Clyphix. Again, they believe Clyphix is an idiot. Finally, we have the conversation that Failsafe and Glint have, which revolves around her talking about her experience with the Headless Ones and how they are neighbors to her, given that they exist in a lost sector that is near her crash site. She also tempts Glint with a little more knowledge before he leaves, having just won his game of checkers against Failsafe, and she says a line that's actually really interesting and I think ties the whole thing together with a crackpot theory that we can really go forward with. And that line is, "But come again, and I'll tell you everything you want to know about the Hive Necromancer who ripped the concept of Headless Ones from the human subconscious." So, I guess this is all finally starting to line up and link things together, but I think something needs to be said before we go ahead and go down and put the kind of red string corkboard theory out there. And that's simply to say that the Headless Ones are analogous to, and are treated in Destiny, like the old creatures of mythology. They are the Minotaurs, Yetis, and Loch Ness monsters of Destiny. People who have seen them all have slightly different versions of a somewhat similar story to talk about, which is basically constantly noted as just mythology. In fact, the idea is dismissed so openly that Europa 3, the entry that's quite close to the beginning of this lore book, even notes that there is a phenomenon for such a thing occurring, similar myths existing at the same time from completely different circumstances in cultures that are not connected. This is to say that the Headless Ones are just as much a concept as a real thing that we've fought and killed, akin to monsters such as vampires and werewolves, just alive not in our consciousness today, in the quote-unquote golden age of when Destiny would have been, but in the future, during the Lost City after the collapse. There's even people all claiming under different circumstances, such as Alien Guy and Idiot Guy, that they have indeed seen these monsters, the Headless Ones. There are, of course, the abundance of people trying to create meaning as well out of something that doesn't have much meaning at all. See Horny Guy, for example. Horny Guy tries to relate the idea of transitory moments in the year to the pumpkins, and the idea that they may be a means of communicating with the dead. He doesn't truly state that last bit, Glint does, but it's one of those moments where by mentioning that that particular time of year was seen as transitory, he kind of puts the cats among the pigeons. So, yeah, he sort of puts Glint on that path. Again though, Europa 3 comes along, and it tries to dispel the idea of all this with the idea that we don't perfectly understand the meaning of the traditions of the past. Again, it's displayed perfectly with the whole thing of the Cryptarch in Europa 3 thinking that lumberjacks and sheepdogs are mythical creatures as well. So, wrapped up in all of this, there's the idea of the Headless Ones being just a myth, and that people who see them are in fact just fatigued or idiotic. But then there are bits of a theory that we could fit together. So, I'm gonna go full red string on the corkboard, and let's try and go ahead and fit together a theory about how the Headless Ones came to be, which I think would be this. With our crazy group of connections, we start with Nokris. It all begins with Nokris, who of course is a necromancer. Now, he experimented with his necromantic power in a bunch of ways on subjects both living and dead. Some of those experiments involved knowledge that he supposedly might have ripped from our subconsciousness as a species, including the general gestalt idea of the Headless Ones, which he was able to manifest into hive knights with pumpkin heads and flaming hive eyes. Perhaps the only thing he needed to do such a thing was an abundance of headless corpses, as found on Europa in the Cadmus Ridge Lost Sector, Nessus under the Exodus Black, and on the moon at the K1 Dig Site 4. Perhaps there need to be some kind of dark influences involved as there was on Luna. Perhaps the decapitated individuals, the victims, needed to be led there for a purpose, such as the Exos on Europa, and perhaps they had to be killed in cold blood, such as the Guardians on Nessus. Perhaps Nokris has nothing to do with this though, and maybe it's all just a bunch of conspiracy theories. Perhaps. But I mean, we have fought the Headless Ones. I don't know, man. It's time to put this video down before I get a headache. Maybe Nokris made the Headless Ones. That's the lore. Destiny the meme is horny. Bonk go to horny jail. I don't know. That's it. We're done with the lore for today. Man, this recording is 30 minutes long. It won't be that long in the video, but wow. I can't believe that I talked about pumpkin eggplant emoji things for like 30 minutes. My job is weird. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like. Let me know what you want to see more of in the comment section down below. Please, no more. I can't. It's too long. It's too much. I don't know what the hell I'm doing anymore. If you want more Destiny lore content, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe. And as per usual, know that your viewership is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Bife, and I am apparently living the meme life today. Paradacia ad Astra. I'll see you all starside. The truth is out there. Aliens, man. I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens.